Center me, enter me, mystical mystery. Cleanse me and quiet me. Tell me thou art the thin thread of hope that sustains my believing, the rush of content that inhabits my heart. The summer I found myself perusing the shelves of the public library like it was my job. I was an unemployed university student in a new city far from home. Well, I'd never known a single moment of my life not being a church kid. Some call it a church geek because I really loved church and still do. God had grown increasingly and unrelentingly distant over the past few years, and by that summer I had become unable to pray, read my Bible, or relate in any way to the view or to the God I knew. White and bearded and in the clouds. So I filled my days with books from the library and old films from the video section, alternately attempting to fix and distract myself from my new spiritual realities. One afternoon, knee-deep in the religious section, looking for the God I seemed to have lost, I happened upon a book called The Divine Feminine, the biblical imagery of God as female, by Virginia Ramey Mollenkott. The copy I held in my hands was already somewhat old and worn, with an outdated mustard design on the cover, and what I assumed would be outdated contents. Still, the concept intrigued me. I hadn't been raised with any sort of awareness of divine feminine, nor with the option of calling God she. For most of my life, I'd struggled with the concept of a male-only God, but never once thought to challenge the traditions that had been passed down to me, to see God as both father and mother, let alone expanding that beyond gender to parent, let alone expanding God beyond a still image to divine fire, mystery, and energy, let alone pushing beyond so very many boundaries of Holy Sophia, Lady Wisdom, the divine breath, etc., that I've come to know and understand deep within myself with a richness that's difficult to explain or express. But I digress. That kind of thing was forbidden in the traditional and somewhat evangelical circles I inhabited. Even if they weren't called that, and might have been horrified to be interpreted in that way. Condemned as goddess worship. And I obediently accepted that restriction. Instead, I'd worked quietly for years at overcoming the baggage that a male God carried for me. I tried my best to imagine a father God who was nurturing rather than authoritative, loving rather than stern. But by the time I encountered divine feminine, I had lost all ability to feel any sense of intimacy with or trust in the God of my youth. I took the book home. Over the next few days, I pored over it in small chunks, soaking up each bit of wisdom I found within its pages. Despite having read the Bible in its entirety several times over, I was astounded by the amount of distinctly female imagery of God to be found there. As I read, I took my little neglected Bible and found every verse said to allude to the divine she, highlighting each one in bright color so I would never forget. I learned to see God as nursing mother and midwife, homemaker, and mother hen as well, of course, as the fierce mother eagle. But the imagery that captured me most was that of the baking woman. Still not exactly sure why. In this section of her book, Mollenkott quotes the first two stanzas of the poem, Baker Woman God, which perhaps many of you have heard, by Alla Renee Bozarth. Listen with me to the whole poem. Baker Woman God, I am your living bread, strong, brown baker woman God. I am your low, soft, and being shaped loaf. I am your rising bread, well kneaded by some divine and naughty pair of knuckles, by your warm earth hands. I am bread well kneaded. Put me in fire, baker woman God. Put me in your own bright fire. I am warm, warm as you from fire. I am white and gold, soft and hard, brown and round. I am so warm from fire. Break me, baker woman God. I am broken under your caring word. Drop me in your special juice pieces. Drop me in your blood. Drunken me in the great red flood. Self-giving chalice, swallow me. My skin shines in the divine wine. My face is cup covered and I drown. I fall up in a red pool in a gold world where your warm sun-skin hand is there to catch me and hold me. Baker woman God, remake me. The imagery wrapped its arms around me with its warmth. As I read, I could see her hands calloused but soft, moving silently over some divine countertop dusted with flour. I could feel her knuckles strong yet tender, digging, digging, digging into the doughy depths of my being. Baker woman God was gentle in her firmness, kind in her correction. Her kneading was not painless, but it was filled with love. I felt safe in her hands. This description of God felt truer and more comforting than any I'd ever known. It came as a brief but refreshing sip of cold water to my soul that year, allowing me a glorious peek into God's love at a time when I had all but lost sight of it. I find it intriguing that bread became one of the themes of life in lockdown. Early on, perhaps you remember, loaves were disappearing from supermarket shelves, flour and yeast likewise. Luckily, we had lots of baking supplies on hand, as Richard likes to bake bread. So he was ready to take up the challenge. Oh, what a good 16 months it has been. Beautiful loaves, golden brown, hot from the oven, scenting the kitchen, some sweeter than others. He made challah the other day. Oh my word. Some a little denser, some seedier. They'd be eaten up within a couple of days and the process would begin again, almost in a spiritual act. Not to mention cookies, date brownies, many other delicacies. Our freezer's still overflowing. Consider the ingredients in bread: wheat flour, multigrain flour, oat flour. I remember the stories of Jesus walking with the disciples in Palestinian fields of wheat and barley. Flour from various grains, the foundation and flavor of many different cultures, all of them my relations. Flavors from a mixture of flours combined, each loaf tasting different depending on the proportions. Water from the tap. Thank you, giver of life, for rain, for our unfailing spring of living water. Thank you to all who are employed to bring water clean and safe to our taps. Yeast, either wild yeast in a starter for sourdough or dried yeast. Either way, I love the magic of activating it. So little needed to make a big batch of dough rise. Salt from the sea, not too little, not too much, but to my taste necessary. A couple of teaspoons will flavor a large loaf. Yes, divine heart, you ask for my true taste to complete the flavors of your world, but in the right amount. A little goes a long way. Sweetening, sugar or honey. Taste and see how gracious divine love is. Oil. In this creative work are spiritual reminders. Planning is required of time and materials to bring cosmos from chaos. Measuring reminds us of the care needed in creation. Justice, if only we remember to stand in solidarity with the essential workers still, whose productive efforts have given us ingredients to use, and with those who have no food this day. As we knead the dough, notice the physical effort required to transform it from a damp, floury mess into springy coherence. Notice too the role of energy in this and every aspect of life, and how the pummeling develops elasticity and resilience. Oh my goodness, patience. Part of the grace of Spirit comes while the dough rises and develops. Humility, as fierce heat tests the dough and transforms it. Care of creation, this loaf needs no plastic wrapping. Joy in the breaking and sharing of good food. Even now, years later, as my feelings of distance from God remain, and perhaps even grow stronger, I often find myself returning to this image, sometimes in my most challenging moments, the nights when God feels little more than a deep chasm of absence. I'll close my eyes and remember Baker Woman God, who even in her silence is making me bread well needed. To this holy, warm, divinely mysterious energy I can relate, and even feel held, nurtured, accepted, and affirmed for the wonderful creation that I am, and am always becoming, sprinkled with yeast and surrounded by the loving wisdom of a community of saints who dance a similar journey. Baker Woman God, thank you. Bless the work of my hands. This is part of our story.